Welcome to the Galien Foundation Week of Biomedical Innovation webinars, celebrating the best of the best in life sciences innovation that improves the human condition. I'm Brandon Perry. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey & Company and one of the leaders of our global life sciences practice, and will be serving as chair and moderator of this one-hour discussion highlighting nominees in the best biotechnology product category of the annual Pre-Galien USA Awards program. The webinars taking place this week serve as essential background for the awards, the Galien Foundation's largest event, held on Thursday evening at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. It takes place in conjunction with our annual Galien USA Forum, which hosts speakers representing top scientific experts, biopharma business executives and entrepreneurs, and leaders in public health. All told, more than 900 representatives of our nominated companies and invited guests will be joining us in person on Thursday. Because the mission of the Galien community is to improve the human condition, we've developed this webinar series to give our nominees in the different categories greater visibility in describing the highs and lows over their long journey to a breakthrough medical discovery. In the best biotechnology product category, which is our focus today, we're pleased to have panelists representing companies that work tirelessly in bringing their breakthrough medicines forward for recognition by the Galien USA Awards Committee of Nobel laureates and other distinguished leaders in science and industry. To start off, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, your company, your title, as well as just a few words describing your association with a nominated product, and then we'll get into the rest of the webinar. If I can ask Jason Richardson to start off.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Jason Richardson. I'm Director in Clinical Research at Bavarian Nordic. I'm happy to be representing all the individuals that work tirelessly on Vimkunya, our chikungunya vaccine. I'm also glad to be part of this discussion. At Bavarian Nordic, our mission is to advance vaccines that address unmet public needs. So today I'm excited to share how we approach the challenge, the innovations behind Vimkunya, and what we learned along the way.
Awesome. Richard, I ask you to go next.
Brandon, thanks for the invitation. We really appreciate it. My name is Richard Daly. I'm the president and CEO of Catalyst Pharmaceuticals, and our product that was nominated is Agamree for the treatment of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And I too am excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Julie.
Hi, thank you, Brandon. I'm Julie Bayless, Vice President of Research at Amgen. I led the preclinical team for our product, the DLL3 bispecific T-cell engager molecule tarlatamab Imdelltra. Pleased to be here.
Great. Thank you. Margaret.
Hi, everyone. My name is Margaret Doyle. I'm the Global Medical Affairs Leader for Tecvayli, our product, in Johnson & Johnson, and I'm delighted to be representing all of the clinical folk and our medical affairs folk who have helped bring this therapy to patients.
Super. Jazian.
Hi, I'm Dr. Galien, Tolbert, Executive Medical Director at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. I'm also the clinical lead for the Talvey program, and honored to be here for this drug forward for patients.
Excellent. And Deepu.
Hi, I'm Deepu Maduri. I'm the compound lead for Carvykti, and I'm here representing the Carvykti team from Johnson & Johnson, where it's the first and only BCMA-directed CAR T-cell therapy approved for relapsed refractory multiple myeloma patients. Thank you to be here.
Thomas.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Lehmann from Novartis. Pleasure to be with you today. As a global program head, I lead a cross-functional global drug development team of Semblix focused on chronic myeloid leukemia, and happy to present the whole team today.
Fabulous. And Dana?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Dana Kennedy. I'm from Pfizer Oncology, and I lead our late-stage development programs for the GU portfolio. I'm absolutely delighted to be representing Padcev, our Nectin-4 targeted antibody drug conjugate today, and looking forward to sharing some of the journey with you.
Fabulous. And rounding us out, Kina.
Hi, everyone. Kina Swanson. I'm coming here from Pfizer, head of the viral vaccines team. And I'm here representing on behalf of the team of Abrysvo, so the vaccine for prevention of respiratory syncytial virus, and looking forward to sharing more as we go through today's session.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your stories. I just want to say, for those of you that are joining live on the webinar, if you'd like to ask a question of our panel, please feel free to use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. We've got a number of kind of initial questions that we'll work through, but we will work to preserve some time toward the end to ask those questions, so please don't be shy. So let's dive in. Richard, Jason, you had alluded to wanting to tell the story of vicuña. I think maybe I would love to hear from each of our panelists this morning, but maybe starting with you, Jason, just why this product, why this disease state, and in particular, what kind of breakthrough did it represent that was so important to patients?
Okay, thank you very much. Our focus on chikungunya disease came from a pretty clear unmet need. Until recently, there was no approved vaccine to protect against this debilitating disease. Just to give you a little bit of background on chikungunya, chikungunya virus is transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes, the same ones that carry dengue as well as Zika, and it causes severe fever, joint pain, rash, and swelling. It's rarely fatal, but it can be life-altering, especially for young children and in older adults where people get chronic conditions. Many suffer from virus or from arthritic-like pain that can last months or even years, and this affects mobility, work, as well as quality of life. Recently, there has been more than 100 countries that have documented chikungunya transmission, and it spans Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, with more than 20 million cases in the last 20 years. Recently, so within the last 3 years, there's been more than 1 million cases reported globally, and particularly due to recent outbreaks in Brazil, Reunion Island, as well as China. One of the biggest concerns is that with climate change and increased global travel, the virus tends to spread into new regions. And we've seen this recently when we've had cases pop up in Europe and as well as the Americas. So overall, the public health risk is growing. Recent modeling suggests that as much as 5.5 billion people are now in an area that's environmentally suitable for chikungunya virus. So to address this need, we created a vaccine called vicuña. It was approved in February by the FDA, this February 2025, and it's currently indicated for people 12 years of age and older. And it was approved based on strong neutralizing antibodies, which served as a surrogate marker of protection. Our goal is pretty simple, but urgent. It was to fill a critical gap for the disease when expanding, to prevent disease that's expanding in long-term, causing long-term suffering. In what ways did the product represent a clinical breakthrough? It represents a breakthrough both scientifically in terms of public health. It's currently the only US-approved chikungunya vaccine indicated for people 12 years of age and older. So that alone is significant. From a scientific perspective, we used virus-like particle platform. This mimics the chikungunya virus, but that contains no genetic material. So importantly, it can't replicate or cause infection. So this design triggers strong neutralizing antibodies. It does it safely, and the platform can also be used for emerging diseases too. Added to that, we see that it's a single dose vaccine. It's delivered in a pre-filled syringe. So it's a format that's really designed for real world use, especially in travel clinics. So, I guess overall, with chikungunya spreading to new regions, vaccine meets a pressing global need. And beyond protection, it raises awareness for vector-borne diseases and strengthens preparedness for future outbreaks.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. Maybe we'll stick on the vaccines thread for a minute. Kina, can you tell us a little bit about Abrysvo?
Sure. So RSV is the leading cause of respiratory disease in children. So the Abrysvo vaccine was developed to address not only disease in infants, but also on the other edge of the age spectrum. So older adults are also susceptible to severe RSV disease. Annually, there are over hundreds of thousands of older adults that are impacted, millions of hospitalizations in children, and particularly in lower middle income countries, RSV illness is associated with over 100,000 deaths in children each year. So the disease burden is substantial and broad reaching across various populations. And this has highlighted the need for an RSV vaccine, and it's not been without lack of substantial effort and commitment across the field. an RSV vaccine has actually been over a 60-year struggle, trying to identify what is the right approach in order to confer high efficacy against this disease. And so during that time, really treatment has been limited largely to palliative care for older adults. And for infants, there has been a monoclonal antibody that's been available called palivizumab previously. However, that monoclonal antibody was very costly. It was also monthly injections into these infants and was limited, therefore, to only infants at highest risk of RSV disease. So the substantial burden really highlighted the important need. There was a clear understanding of what might be the right composition for an RSV vaccine, but really how to put it into the most immunogenic form was the challenge. And with a scientific breakthrough in 2013 by NIH scientists that identified the right structure of the main target for an RSV vaccine, and that's the fusion protein, or the F protein, in its pre-fusion conformation, really opened up the field and was a game changer. And so following that scientific breakthrough, Pfizer went on to develop what is now the only bivalent pre-fusion F-based vaccine. So this includes pre-fusion proteins that represent the two major subgroups of RSV that cause severe disease to help provide broad protection. And it's the only vaccine that's approved for use across 3 populations. So that includes pregnant individuals in order to protect young infants through maternally transferred antibodies that can protect against RSV disease in young infants that are most vulnerable to this disease. Also, active immunization for protection of older adults, as well as younger adults that are at increased risk. So really the reception has been overwhelming of the RSV vaccine, given the multi-decade struggle. And I'll talk in the next section about how we're starting to see the initial impacts of this vaccine.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Kina. Maybe Richard, could I turn to you to hear the story of AGAMREE?
Sure. So there's been a lot of activity in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. We've all seen it. It's obviously been in the news a great deal. Most of it's great. Some of it's unfortunate. But when you look at the activity and the interest here, we're really excited about a product like AGAMREE. So there's a lot of cell therapy, gene therapy that are very targeted therapies, which is great. And we applaud this work, and we look forward to seeing this be really successful. However, the foundation of treatment for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is steroids. And in the US, there are 11 to 13,000 boys, it's almost all boys, who have this disease. And the interesting thing about it, a steroid, is that when you take a steroid, the patient actually can walk for 2 to 2.5 years longer than a patient who never takes a steroid. So these are foundational therapies that make a huge difference in the life of the young man. The challenge here is that 95% of patients have been on a steroid, but only 75% currently remain on a steroid. And the question is why? And what attracted us to AGAMREE is that it's a differentiated steroid, and it's as efficacious in reducing inflammation and helping muscle strength, but it appears to have a better adverse event profile, a better safety profile. So we're really excited about the difference this can make for these young men who want the best life possible and help them with their ambulation and dexterity over time. So we saw this as a great opportunity to bring a product to market that would make a huge difference. And the uptake of the product has been phenomenal. The reception has been great. And as a matter of fact, it was recently approved in Canada, and it's Canada's first treatment for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which I think is hard to believe. First approved therapy. So we're really excited about it, and we continue to make inroads with the physicians and the care community as well. So we're really excited about the product and its future.
Fabulous. Congrats. Margaret, I'd love to hear a bit about TECVAYLI.
Sure. So maybe just to start a little bit about why Johnson & Johnson chose to focus on multiple myeloma. It's definitely a heritage area for us, but our goal for myeloma is cure. So it's an ambitious goal. But we do believe that this is achievable with the right medicines in the right order, combined or monotherapy, but given as early as possible in the disease course. So since 2003, J&J has brought 6 first-in-class therapies for myeloma to patients. So it's something we're really focused on improving outcomes in. But with 180,000 patients plus every year living with this disease, and a third of them not living beyond 5 years from their first initial diagnosis, we still have a fair bit of work to do. I think in terms of the breakthrough and the innovation, as you look across the myeloma landscape, you'll see that immunotherapy has started to play a very big role since about 2020. And Tecvayli is the first bispecific antibody to be approved for the treatment of multiple myeloma. It binds to BCMA on the myeloma cell and CD3 on the T cell, bringing the two of them in close proximity for immune-mediated killing of the myeloma cells. It's an off-the-shelf therapy, so it can be given in the community, and we're learning more and more about that as we treat more patients. When we first brought out this bispecific, education was the key. So we were launching into the 4th and 5th line space, but efficacy was very promising. About 2/3 of patients were responding, and most of them were having a deep response. And we all know that the deeper response is so important for that longer progression-free and overall survival. We saw something new with safety. Physicians started to experience cytokine release syndrome and some serious infections. So we had to work very closely with physicians to design and establish protocols to manage both CRS and infections. But importantly, what we learned is, as we looked at the data, the earlier you treat in a patient's disease course, the better. You were starting to see better efficacy and a trend towards improved safety. So it really started us thinking about how to move into earlier lines of therapy. And I think in terms of the product itself as a breakthrough medicine, we have right now our indication is in monotherapy in later lines, but we have frontline, second line, all the way through as monotherapies and in combination regimens, so that pretty much every patient will be able to access a Tecvayli-based regimen in the future, hopefully. We've started to see 100% response rates when we combine Tecvayli with daratumumab. We saw that in transplant-eligible patients. We're also combining Tecvayli with Talvey, which Jazz will talk about a little later, and we're seeing phenomenal results there in patients with extramedullary disease. And these patients pretty much have a progression-free survival of less than 6 months. So we're really starting to see, as we learn more and more about how this drug works, how it can be combined and used in the best regimen in the right line of therapy for patients.
Fabulous. Thank you. You teed up, I think, a nice transition. Jazzy, do you want to tell us a bit about Talvey?
Yeah, happy to do so. Talvey is, I would say, is probably like what I consider to be one of my kids. I've been on the program since 2020 and have had the opportunity to work in the phase 1, phase 2, and now the large phase 3 trial. So I've really sort of watched the development and been really integral to the development of this product. But your question was about, why is Johnson & Johnson in this space? And I think Margaret, she really laid it out really nice for us, that the need is still there, right? We have all these wonderful therapies, and I'm honored and privileged to have 2 of my colleagues here with me on this panel, and all 3 of us representing different products, all focused on multiple myeloma. I think that alone speaks to Johnson & Johnson's understanding of the unmet need in multiple myeloma, but also to our commitment to get in front of cancer and to bring forth novel therapies that are aimed, as Margaret stated, at our ambitious goal of getting to a cure. But multiple myeloma is not a new thing. I mean, the first case was described back in the 1800s, and here we are, it's 2025, and we still don't have a cure. So our work is focused on those patients who continue to battle with this disease, going into this fight, knowing that even at first diagnosis that you're going to have a relapse, and knowing how, a defeating feeling that is to go into a fight already knowing that you're probably going to lose because it will return. And so I think that's why our focus remains here in multiple myeloma, and it remains one of our top causes. But for Talvey, as I mentioned, innovation is in our name. And I think Talvey is like a true depiction of our innovative mindset. So if you're unaware, it's actually a first-in-class, off-the-shelf, so just like Tecvayli, bispecific antibody that's directed at GPRC5D. Now, GPRC5D is an orphan receptor. It's a novel target that we developed in-house at J&J, and so that's innovation alone. But outside of just being able to bring that therapy forward and finding a new target for multiple myeloma, we've also been able to work on the convenience and flexibility of giving it to patients. So we dose it weekly or bi-weekly, and it's a subcutaneous dose. And the fact that, as Margaret has stated, it's off the shelf, we can get it out into communities, because while we love to run our clinical trials and look at new ways to dose our therapies, it does us no good to not be able to get it out to all patients who are battling these diseases. And as a physician and an oncologist myself, I know how we're always looking for the newest therapies for our patients. But I know the hesitancy as well when we have new therapies is wondering, how will this work for my patient in the long term? What will be the side effects? And as Margaret has mentioned, we don't only just look at the efficacy and the safety, but we look at what else is this drug doing to the patient? And how can we make sure that we work on all of these things that would affect the patient, not just the efficacy and safety, but the outcome for the patient long term. And so we've been able to do that with Talvey in innovative ways, not only working on trials to improve the efficacy and safety, but also to improve the quality of life of the patients and to manage the side effects. And Margaret may talk about some of the trials we have with our medical affairs colleagues that look at managing the side effects of these drugs as well. So I think, we continue to consider both the health and the care of the patients and looking at the patient as a whole. Talvey has been able to do that in an innovative way. We've not only had our Monumental 1 trial, which was monotherapy, showing amazing results with over 70% overall survival in patients who've had 4 lines of therapy or more. That's a lot of treatment for one disease. But now we're combining Talvey with other therapies. We just published a paper in Blood that showed the combination of Talvey with daratumumab in multiply relapsed patients who were even refractory to daratumumab, showing that you can still get an overall response rate greater than 80%. And durable responses. As Margaret spoke to, the durability of those responses is also important, and the depth of those responses is important.
Awesome. Thank you. Deepu, I promise we'll come back to round out the Carvykti story, but I want to get some other cancer stories into the mix here. Maybe Thomas, do you want to tell us about Scemblix?
Yeah, sure. So Novartis has been pioneering the treatment of chronic myeloid leukemia since over 30 years. CML had been a deadly disease before Novartis introduced its first tyrosine kinase inhibitor, Gleevec, nearly 25 years ago, which transformed this deadly disease into a manageable disease. It was already recognized by multiple Galien awards. And subsequently, 3 second-generation tyrosine kinase inhibitors have been introduced, one by Novartis. Yet, while these tyrosine kinase inhibitors have significantly improved outcomes for once deadly disease, over half of the new patients don't reach the gold standard milestone major molecular responses and have discontinuation rates as high as 14% in their first year of treatment. And moreover, limited selectivity of these medicines, in particular due to structural similarities between the different ATP binding sites across the many kinases, frequently result in off-target effects which impair short and long-term safety and also have a persistent impact on quality of life. So what is now special with Scemblix? So unlike all prior TKI treatments, which bind, as said, to the ATP binding site of the BCR-ABL oncoprotein, Scemblix binds to a myristoyl pocket of the ABL kinase domain. And this is an allosteric binding site, which is unique to that oncoprotein. Nowhere else is a protein with that myristoyl binding site, and thus blocking the ABL1 kinase in its inactive conformation and mimicking its natural autoinhibition. And this unique new mechanism of action enables high selectivity combined with high potency. And then proving that in the clinic, Scemblix did show in head-to-head phase 3 studies versus these standard of care TKIs, both superior efficacy, but also combined with a better safety and tolerability profile. And based on this profile, and recognized unmet need, FDA granted 3 breakthrough therapy designations and approved Scemblix via priority review procedures now for all CML treatment lines. So this profile and broad approval resulted then in fast clinical adoption, with Scemblix now 1 year after the first line approval in the US being the market leader for new prescriptions in the US. And 1 month post that approval was also then recommended as category 1 preferred treatment by the NCCN guidelines for newly diagnosed patients. And then happy to go into the more in-depth clinical impact in the second question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's hear from Dana about Padcev.
Sure, great, thank you. So we're developing Padcev, our Nectin-4 targeted ADC for patients with bladder cancer. Locally advanced or metastatic urothelial carcinoma really for us represented a very high unmet medical need where there were few novel therapies and the standard of care had remained unchanged for over 30 years. The disease burden of locally advanced or metastatic urothelial carcinoma is significant and characterized by poor prognosis, high healthcare utilization, and substantial cost to patients and their families. The majority of patients have their bladder removed and have concurrent renal dysfunction, which is very common and prompts significant comorbidities. Survival with platinum-based chemotherapy doublets, which has been the standard of care for over 30 years, is less than a year to a year and a half, with many patients not candidates for optimal cisplatin-based chemotherapy due to comorbidities. The 5-year survival rate is approximately 8%, and the disease is generally considered incurable. Patients experience a high volume of healthcare utilization, including frequent outpatient visits and hospitalizations, especially after disease progression. So focusing on this very high unmet need, we brought a targeted therapy to bear. So preclinical and translational work showed that Nectin-4 is highly expressed on urothelial carcinoma with limited expression on normal tissues, which makes it an attractive target for an antibody-drug conjugate delivering a vedotin payload. In addition, preclinical evidence supports that vedotin-based ADCs prompt immunogenic cell death, which makes Padcev an ideal combination partner with checkpoint inhibitors. This has really been a therapeutic breakthrough for patients. In the late-line settings, after patients have already received platinum-based chemotherapy and/or PD-L1 inhibitors, Padcev as monotherapy improved overall survival versus single-agent chemotherapy and really established the first clear survival advantage after progression on these therapies. In the first-line setting, in combination with pembrolizumab, Padcev reduced the risk of death by over 50% versus platinum-based chemotherapy regimens, with a median survival that was unprecedented at 34 months versus 16 months with standard of care chemotherapy. This is really a step change that has reshaped frontline care for patients. We just recently presented data with 2.5 years of median follow-up and continue to show this profound OS benefit with consistent benefit across all subgroups. Padcev and pembrolizumab is now embedded as a preferred category 1 first-line treatment in NCCN guidelines for bladder cancer and in guidelines globally. Oncologists were incredibly receptive to this new therapy, given the magnitude of survival gain and chemotherapy sparing potential. But they did and do monitor for Padcev-related toxicities, including cutaneous reactions, as well as peripheral neuropathy, where our labeling emphasizes early recognition and dose modifications for toxicities. So the bottom line, the program targeted a high prevalence, high Nectin-4 disease with profound unmet need, post-platinum-based chemotherapy, post-IO, and then delivered really category-defining overall survival benefits in the first-line treatment setting, making Padcev and pembrolizumab a genuine breakthrough for patients and defining a new standard of care.
Awesome. Thanks, Dana. Julie, can you tell us about Imdeltra?
Sure. Thank you, Brandon. Imdeltra is our DLL3 targeted bispecific T-cell engager antibody for small cell lung cancer. And small cell lung cancer is an aggressive disease with no cure. The 5-year survival rate is about 7%, hasn't changed over decades. The standard of care has been combination chemotherapy with limited advances over the last 30 years. So we really need to approach small cell lung cancer with a different mode of action, different kind of therapeutic. One thing that's interesting about small cell lung cancer is even though it has genetic alterations, really none of those are actionable. Immune checkpoint blockade, which has been very successful for other tumor types, including non-small cell lung cancer, really has not had the same magnitude of effect in small cell lung cancer. And so we aim to go after it with our bispecific T-cell engager antibody. And we've heard about a couple of those already today for multiple myeloma. Amgen's experience started with Blincyto, our CD19 targeted T-cell engager for B-ALL. And based on the promise of that, we thought that it may apply also to the solid tumor setting. So we aim to identify targets in small cell lung cancer that could be amenable to this technology. And DLL3 is a target that's expressed on most small cell lung cancer. It's expressed on the surface of small cell lung cancer, and it's in normal cells, it's predominantly low expression and in the cytoplasm. And so when we developed tarlatamab, which became Imdelltra, what we found is that it really transformed how we think about changing treatment care for small cell lung cancer. What we found in the pivotal phase 2 study was that 40% of patients had an objective response. The overall survival was 15.2 months. So this really was a breakthrough in terms of a new therapy that was finally starting to make a difference for patients. We also found that Imdelltra had activity in patients that have received many other lines of therapy, at least 2 lines of therapy before receiving Imdelltra, and it provided a targeted immunotherapy approach. And so as we talked about for some of the other products here, the way that Imdelltra works is that it has a tumor-targeted arm on one side, in this case DLL3. It targets CD3 on T cells on the other arm, and in that way brings the cytotoxic T cells in proximity to the tumor cells and kills them. So what we found in advancing Imdelltra for small cell lung cancer patients was it was really a different kind of therapy than what patients were used to, but it was bringing such a transformational benefit. And within a month of the approval of Imdelltra in May 2024, it was added to the NCCN guidelines for a second-line treatment option for patients. And it's really, I have the good fortune to meet a couple of patients who were treated with Imdelltra, and it was truly inspirational. They were able to walk. They said they got their life back, really bringing an outstanding benefit to patients. And so now as we're continuing to develop Imdelltra, started in the late line setting, now exploring it in the front line setting in combination with chemotherapy, also exploring it in combination with other molecules, and recently reported some of the data at a recent congress, and really looking forward to see if we can bring Imdelltra to more small cell lung cancer patients.
Awesome. Great story. Thank you. And maybe Deepu, can you round us out with, I think we've had a bunch of modalities, ADCs, bispecifics, other antibodies. This is a different way of treating multiple myeloma.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, thanks, Brandon. I've been on Carvykti since 2018. I was actually the physician who treated the first patients and presented the data on the study. And it's kind of interesting for me because I've come full circle. I've gone from treating the patients to then going to Johnson & Johnson and then getting the product approved for 4+ lines initially. And then now it's recently been approved for anybody that's had at least 2 prior lines of therapy can now take Carvykti. What's interesting about Carvykti compared to what you've heard with everyone else so far is that it's an autologous genetically modified T-cell therapy. So we're basically taking the T cells from the patient, genetically modifying them, and then we're engineering the CAR that specifically recognizes BCMA. And BCMA is something that's found on the multiple myeloma plasma cells. So in a way, they attack it, and then that's when you get the tumor killing. What's interesting about this therapy as well is that, one, it's not off the shelf. So it does take time because you are genetically modifying your individual T cells. So it could take anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks to modify these T cells and get the product ready. And another interesting thing, it's a one-time treatment. Most of the other treatments, that we've heard about for multiple myeloma typically are given continuously, whether it's an oral pill or whether my patients are coming in every week for treatment. But this is the first time you get to see a CAR T-cell therapy, one and only, where you give it one-time dose and you're seeing significant responses. What's interesting is the first patient that I treated in August of 2018, I'm happy to say, is still in remission, right? And patients with multiple myeloma, especially when they've had this many lines of therapy, you end up seeing that they end up relapsing, and their overall survival is usually less than a year. And so to see that and to see this patient still alive in 2018 And I know recently we presented our data at ASCO, where we talked about the CARTITUDE-1 study, the original relapse refractory study, and we have about a third of patients who are still potentially cured, right? So cure was a word, like Jazz and Margaret were saying. It's hard to say with multiple myeloma because it's technically an incurable disease. But all these new modalities that are coming, hopefully we can figure out a way to sequence them, and this potential cure can actually turn into a cure in general. And recently we've done it earlier lines, right? For CARTITUDE-4, now we have showed a study that shows statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in overall survival if you give the treatment early. And now we're working on studies like CARTITUDE-5 and CARTITUDE-6, where we're giving this BCMA CAR-T, CARVYKTI, in newly diagnosed patients, where we're going head-to-head against standard of care therapy. So I think there's a lot to come with CARVYKTI and a lot that's going to happen in multiple myeloma space, where we're actually giving the patients a chance to live their life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for sharing those stories. I think a number of you, maybe almost every single one of you, alluded to the patient benefit that these new products have had. I'd love to maybe come back around to that, because at the end of the day, the Galien Foundation Awards really celebrate measurable improvements in human outcomes through breakthrough medical discoveries. And again, a bunch of you have touched on these, but I'd love to hear sort of some stories. Maybe Jason, if I can come back to you, about like what has been the measurable impact, what's been clinician response. And I mean, would love to hear either like overall stories in terms of the data that you've got on an aggregate level, or just a singular patient story that or a specific event that really encapsulates what's special about your product.
Sure, thank you. So this product, again, was licensed recently, so within this year. So majority of what we have is based on clinical trial data, although it's now licensed in the US. So a lot of the clinical trial data did suggest that it had a great potential to deal with chikungunya disease at risk populations. Ongoing clinical studies will clarify if the real world impact is once it becomes available. Early post-approval safety monitoring in the US and Europe is not identified any serious concerns, or reported side effects have been mild, similar to what was seen in clinical studies. So the data that we have from our clinical studies is over 5 trials with 2 supportive trials, more than 3,000 participants exposed to the product. Our results showed really strong immune responses. Over 98% were seropositive, or had a seroresponse, within the first 21 days or 3 weeks of vaccination in the age 12 to 64. The rapid onset, nearly half the participants within 7 days of vaccination had that level of seroresponse. In older adults, we also saw a seroresponse that was robust. Safety was thoroughly assessed, and most adverse events were mild and moderate and short of duration. So really, once practitioners see that it's a single dose, it results in rapid and robust immune response and has a good safety profile, we hope that they adopt. The adoption becomes less about convincing them and more about the education. So helping help providers understand who should receive it and how it fits into travel health and outbreak preparedness. Overall, what's been the clinicians' response? They've generally responded fairly positively to Vimkunya. We highlight the fact that it's a VLP platform, so it's a non-live vaccine. That provides an option for individuals 12 and older. The timely onset of protection was quite important, and the availability of a pre-filled syringe. They mentioned that this was also a relevant characteristic for those traveling into areas with chikungunya as a concern. At the same point, clinicians do recognize that there are ongoing studies. Continued monitoring will be important to fully understand the vaccine's long-term impact as well as its overall safety profile. As far as decision makers, they've recognized the importance of having a preventative option for chikungunya, and they see that the single-dose non-live formulation for a broad range of age is important. It does again met an unmet public health need. And at the same time, there's a clear understanding more real data is needed. Early discussions with public health authorities and payers suggest that it's been very constructive, and ongoing engagement will clarify the vaccine's additional role as evidence emerges and time passes with this product approved in the US and elsewhere.
Nice. That's a great story. Richard, earlier you alluded to how your product is allowing men to walk longer than they used to. I'm curious, sort of from your perspective, how you think about the patient benefit and where your product kind of fits in the broader DMD treatment landscape going forward.
So to be clear, all steroids do that. The trade-off is a really rough one, though. So imagine you have a disease that by your late 20s, early 30s, it's likely you're not going to be alive. And these patients face a dilemma. It's a significant dilemma. So staying on a steroid really matters, and it helps the patient and keeps them ambulatory, as we talked about. 95% of them have been on one, 75% are currently on one. So where's the gap? So Agamree is equally efficacious to all other steroids. Its mechanism of action is different. And what ends up happening with a chronic steroid use is you have behavior issues with the young man. There are stature issues. They don't grow like their peers. Bone strength issues, and we all know that steroids actually have weight gain issues. And so you can imagine with more fragile bones, there's a challenge, obviously, of breaks, and breaks are a significant issue. But you also have cataracts and cardiovascular disease. And cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of men with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So the trade-off is one where you're choosing either you're going to stay on this drug, which has all of these side effects, or you're going to try something different. And so the benefit of Agamree is that it actually has potential. And our colleagues at Synthera, we licensed the drug in. Our colleagues at Synthera have done a very, very nice job of profiling the drug. It appears to have behavior benefit. It's still early in the launch. We launched last year in March. And so we're still in launch mode. But it appears to have benefits of behavior. And you can imagine it's not just a benefit for the young man. So here's a young man, a boy who's in second grade or third grade, and he's behaving badly because he has aggression issues. Every child in that classroom is affected. The parents are affected. The family, the siblings are affected. If you can have improved behavior, everybody wins. So it's a really big opportunity for the young man and the family and the community as well. Stature is important, growing. So you may be wheelchair bound at some point in your life, but to be able to say you're 5'10" like your peers matters to that young man. And then obviously bone strength, reducing the number of fractures and all the healthcare associated costs with DMD. And then obviously the chance to alleviate cardiovascular side effects or cardiovascular endpoints becomes really critical to the quality of life for that young man or that adult man now. So when we see the opportunity here, we see one where we are equally efficacious and we have that opportunity to improve the quality of life across the board. So it's very exciting, and we're seeing really solid uptake from the physicians. And this drug was under development for quite a long time. So the patient community and the caregiver community were really aware of it. And so they were waiting for it. So we're really excited that this can make a difference. And patients won't have to make that trade-off in the future.
That's great. I want to transition, Kina, just to Abrysvo for a minute to hear a little bit about, obviously, RSV been a big breakthrough broadly. There's a number of products that have kind of come to market. How you're seeing kind of the benefit broadly, and if there are specific patient stories, what the clinical community has been kind of saying about this, especially for older patients who are kind of benefiting from this now.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. We launched the vaccine for the 2023-2024 RSV season, and I have to say, as an immunologist by training, sitting at the bench in my early days, watching cells pass across the flow cytometer, now seeing that original research that contributed to the Abrysvo RSV vaccine translating into real impact, not just for the individuals, but also for the families, has been extremely rewarding, and to be able to share that with the broader world. So as I mentioned, it rolled out in the 23-24 season, and we now are starting to accumulate multi-country real-world data that is reinforcing not only the safety profile, but also the effectiveness of the Abrysvo vaccine. So Some of the country data include both in the United States, in the UK, as well as a large pragmatic trial in Denmark, where we're observing high efficacy, anywhere from 70 to greater than 90%, against RSV-associated hospitalization in older adults. And this also includes a broader population than was included in the original pivotal phase 3 efficacy trial. So now we're also seeing within those real-world studies encouraging efficacy trends that include individuals that are either immunocompromised, as well as various transplant populations. So very exciting in the older adult space, in the infant space, as well as in the older adult space. In the real-world data, we're also seeing impacts not just on RSV-associated disease, but also all-cause disease. So an impact on reducing the burden of lower respiratory tract disease due to any cause. So I think when you initially roll out any product, you have some idea of the potential impact. But I think it's only until you see the real world implementation that you can start to fully visualize and quantify the potential breadth of the impact. So we're still reasonably early days in the real world data collection, but we have a lot of ongoing studies to continue to build on that. And also in the infant space to see over time, there is some association of RSV disease at an early infant age with a higher risk of chronic wheeze and asthma. So I think it will be also interesting to see if we see a more longer term impact and benefit in that particular area as well. And just to really put boots on the ground here to see what is the impact we're seeing in the real world setting. In Argentina, we have an ongoing real world effectiveness study there as well. And within Argentina, they are have implemented the Abrysvo RSV vaccine for maternal immunization. And in the first season, so this was last year, they had an impressive 63% uptake of the vaccine for maternal immunization. And as a result, even within just the single season, they're starting to see the neonatal intensive care unit sitting empty due to the lack of RSV cases. So one of the substantial burdens of the healthcare system in a typical RSV season at the peak is an overwhelmed hospital wards. And so again, just some of the impact that we're seeing already for the vaccine. Now, notwithstanding, I think it's important to note that RSV is still, in contrast to influenza, it's not a nationally notifiable disease. Routine testing isn't really common practice yet. There's awareness there, but there's still, I think, a lot of room for improvement to help us quantify the overall impact of RSV disease. And then we can continue to better understand the potential impact of the vaccine.
Awesome. It's a great story about Argentina. Really interesting. I want to do something a little unconventional, actually, and ask Margaret, Jazz, and Deepu, you are all bringing amazing therapeutic products forward to treat multiple myeloma. At the same time, at least one of you mentioned that this is sort of technically a non-curable disease. Like, how do you see either combinations of Tectal and Carvykti or new frontiers of innovation kind of coming together to paint a new picture for multiple myeloma patients in the future? I mean, and maybe I'll start with you, Jazz, since I see you in my line of sight. But yeah, I would love your reflections. I think it's a rare opportunity here, from 3 different angles treating such a wicked disease.
Yeah, I think thanks for that question, Brandon, because it's something that we're trying to answer here at J&J as well. And I think Deepu sort of led into it. Like we have all of these great options now, still no cure, but there's a way that maybe we can sequence all 3 of these therapies, or even some of the other therapies that we have to get patients to a cure. But in addition to that, Margaret and I have worked on Tecvayli and Talvey. One is a BCMA-directed therapy, the other is GPRC5D, but that led to us now looking at another novel therapy, which is a trispecific. So we went from bispecifics to trispecifics, and now we want to see, can we target all of these receptors and get patients to a cure. So the tri-specific would target CD3 on the T cells, and then BCMA and GPRC5D on the multiple myeloma cells. So all of these therapies are sort of sparking innovation and different ways for us to get patients to a cure. So sequencing or targeting all the therapies at once, can we do that to get closer to cure?
Really cool. Margaret, Deepu, anything to add? I mean, it is an amazing kind of journey that y'all have been on.
Maybe one thing that's maybe a little unique about Tecvayli is that when we ran this trial, we ran it the day the world went into lockdown with the pandemic.
Right.
So it was the first bispecific used. Nobody knew about the CRS or the serious infections. There was COVID on top. There was no vaccines for COVID. There was no treatments. So I think with Tecvayli, we learned as we went with the clinicians, and it led to a very tight partnership to really develop infectious protocols, CRS management protocols, get them into NCCN guidelines. But then because we were working as such a close team with Talvey, with Carvicti, we could bring those learnings through all the way. So everything from side effect management to dosing, as these therapies are evolving in sequence in J&J, we're able to bring the learnings through the close partnerships. And I think that really helps us when it comes to, say, combining Tec and Tal together, or if you want to bridge to Carvicti with Talvey. So I think that's been a really unique learning for us as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that, it's just to close it out, right? We're doing all this for the patients, right? These patients, like I mentioned, have a potential incurable disease that with all of these amazing therapies, we're bringing them closer. Like I had a patient that actually we didn't know much about. We licensed this product from Legend and asked, okay, I want to see the birth of my first grandchild. So can I please, okay, I'll just sign up and I'll do this therapy when we didn't know much about it. So I'm happy to say after getting Carvicti, she hasn't seen the birth of one grandchild, but she's seen the birth of 9 grandchildren, right?
Wow.
So that's something that you have not heard of for multiple myeloma therapies, and especially with sequencing and moving it to earlier lines. And like when you're newly diagnosed, right? This is really going to change the standard of care. You won't need autologous stem cell transplant. You won't need these continuous therapies. Eventually our goal is to get to a finite duration, hopefully even sequencing with the bispecifics, the trispecifics, whatever we can come up with.
And Brandon, if we're allowed to just share patient stories, because I think like Deepu has said, it's all about the patients at J&J for Talvey and for Tecvayli as well. I mean, just a quick patient story. We had a Talvey patient who a physician contacted to get the patient on a clinical trial who was actually going into hospice. That she had so many rounds of therapy, nothing had worked, and was going to be placed on palliative care. And the physician convinced her to say, maybe we could try this new therapy, which was Talvey. It's novel. It's a new target. And now she's asking to skip patient visits because she's traveling around the world, flying and seeing her family. So a lot of those stories, just where you had mentioned before, the patient impact, and it's always where we keep our focus, right? Like we want to get, as Deepu has said, more watching more births of grandkids, flying out to see your family, just more time with your family members, more good nights, more good mornings with these therapies.
Wonderful. I want to recognize Julie, Thomas, Dana, you guys are all also working against really, really difficult diseases that have, in some cases, really poor prognoses. Would love just to hear from you guys. Maybe Julie, start off, then Dana and Thomas, and keep an eye on the clock. But whether it's individual patient stories or what inspires you about the product that you're working on, I think it'd be a really wonderfully high note to end this webinar on.
Thanks, Brandon. I think it's all about providing options for patients to let them live their lives and not worry constantly about treatment and whether their cancer is going to recur. And so that was really the power of Imdeltra, the DLL3 targeted bispecific antibody. I think the mechanism really did what other therapies could not. It was able to redirect T cells to kill the tumor cells.
Yeah.
And it resulted in transformational efficacy. And so patients are able to live to see another birthday, to see another holiday, to see another milestone. I think where it really came to life for me was last fall, I attended an advocacy event. And small cell lung cancer patients often have shortness of breath, they often have cough. They had asked all of the small cell lung cancer survivors to come up on the stage, and they all walked up on the stage. It was really powerful. So it's really shifting how we think about small cell lung cancer. as discussed for multiple myeloma, our goal is cure for small cell lung cancer. We believe we will get there through combinations, and Imdelltra is one step along the way to improve patient outcomes.
That's great. Yeah, Dana, bladder cancer.
Sure. So maybe I'll have two quick things. So first, in the locally advanced and metastatic setting, what we're seeing as our data evolves is that the patients who can achieve a complete response to Padcev and pembrolizumab, and this occurs in about 30% of patients, we have not yet reached a median duration of response in these patients. And as we continue to follow them over time, we are cautiously optimistic that we might be impacting their long-term disease course. So our strategies moving forward are focusing on how can we get more patients into complete response and get these really long-term durability that gives patients more time. Time is life, more milestones, more time with loved ones. And then secondly, we're also very interested in continuing to think about how we can mitigate earlier stages of disease. So patients with muscle invasive bladder cancer who are candidates to have their bladder removed often do so. It's the standard of care. We have two studies ongoing in the perioperative setting, giving Padcev and pembrolizumab for several cycles before radical cystectomy, and then for several cycles after. And we just recently presented data at the European Society of Medical Oncology showing that this combination in patients who are cisplatin ineligible, that means that they're not candidates for chemotherapy, they simply go to radical cystectomy. Giving a perioperative regimen resulted in a 60% reduction in the risk of an event-free survival event, as well as a 50% reduction in the risk of an OS event. So we've already and again have demonstrated impact to patients in this setting. And of note, the pathologic complete response rate when patients had their bladder removed was almost 60%. That means that several cycles of therapy before patients go to have their bladder removed results in no evidence of disease. And so where we are focused for the future is developing strategies, clinical trial strategies that may help enable patients to keep their bladders, which would have a substantial benefit for these patients with an earlier form of bladder cancer and really impact their long-term outcome and quality of life.
That's awesome. Thomas.
Thanks. Yeah, so for chronic myeloid leukemia, our ultimate goal is to cure or provide a functional cure for patients, meaning they can stop treatment and still stay in deep remission. And with Scemblix, we already showed for frontline patients that more patients can achieve major molecular responses and also more deep molecular responses, which is then needed to stop therapy and still remain in major molecular response. And we are currently following up our trials. We are currently at 2 years of follow-up, and that trend continues. And we will now generate this data on treatment-free remission, where we are optimistic since, of course, having a more efficacious treatment, but also half only the discontinuation rates due to adverse events. And maybe lastly, to finish off patient story, we have this, with this great tolerability profile, we have these amazing stories. For example, concert violinist who started treatment with Scemblix, and she didn't miss a single concert she had to give, because often, of course, the problem is the side effects, muscle cramps and so on. On Scemblix, she could do basically her normal life and do her ambitious concerts. Thank you.
Amazing. Fantastic. Thank you all. There was one kind of in the waning 90 seconds we have, there was an interesting question that came in through the Q&A, which observed that we've got a bunch of quote unquote big pharma product nominees here, and was asking the question, how many of the products that we're talking about here actually have their origins either in startups or in academia? Obviously, I think Catalyst, Bavarian Nordic are slightly different, but I mean, I'd be curious, maybe just through a show of hands, for the product in question, was it something that was internally developed? If yes, I'd be curious to sort of see, because I think it'd be very interesting. All right, so Thomas, so interesting, about 4 out of 9. And I think when you look industry-wide, about 60 to 70% of products that ultimately make it are licensed in from somewhere else. So that roughly tracks. In any case, I just want to close by thanking all of you for the incredible work that you've done on behalf of patients, on behalf of industry. These stories are just incredibly heartwarming and energizing. So thank you all for coming. For those that weren't able to see this live, this webcast is viewable on Galien Foundation's homepage, which is www.galienfoundation.org. And for the rest of you all, on behalf of myself, the foundation, and the rest of the panelists, we're really looking forward to seeing you all Thursday. And thank you again for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.